Am I the only black person that finds it odd that when white people and black people are having a conversation about white privilege, white people have a tendency to ask the question, what rights do you have that I don't? As though racism could be legislated out of somebody's heart? It's the most gaslighting question we've ever heard in our lives. Law and legislation isn't written in that fashion. Take, for example, the Three-Fifths Compromise. That shit wasn't written with black people at the table. The Three-Fifths Compromise was reached among state delegates during the 1787 Constitutional Convention. It determined that 3 out of every 5 slaves was counted when determining a state's total population for legislative representation and taxation. Why didn't it say black? Because who the fuck was white that was a slave during that time? Nobody. But for some reason, the verbiage used was slaves. Redlining is a discriminatory practice in which services are withheld from potential customers who reside in the neighborhoods classified as hazardous to investment. Customers, not blacks. But practices such as the Three-Fifths Compromise and redlining affected blacks almost solely. Now here's the question. Economically, politically, and socially, how many generations does it take to destroy a family structure or demographic? The answer is 1. Concordantly, anytime thereafter, you don't need to write in legislation and law that you're discriminating against black people because it's already happened and the practices still exist. And how do they still exist? Head Start. If I'm able to take out a loan or put up my house as collateral in order to send my children to college, then my children have a head start on not only paying that loan back, but securing financial solvency in the future. I don't have to write a law after that stipulates that black people can't go to PWIs. They don't have the money to attend anyway. And so it goes throughout generation to generation. Meanwhile, on the other side of the tracks, generational poverty is what prevails. And practices like nepotism will ensure that white people remain in financial power. Because once I die, am I going to give the family business to my son or this black person across the tracks that I've never met before? Policing. I don't care how many laws you write, you cannot legislate out of the heart the man that is a member of the organization that began as a slave patrol, racism. I don't care how many laws you write, once inside that uniform, behind that badge, and on that beat, that man will forever look at black people as criminals and white people not so much so. And any man that joins that organization thereafter. It don't matter if that police officer is black or Hispanic, it takes a psychologically broken person to join the very organization that put your people essentially in captivity. I mean, sure, you could tell yourself throughout the duration of your career that you're doing a service for black people by being a go-between between white racist police officers and the black population, but at the end of the day, your power only extends as far as white people let it. And there is no such thing as a black militant police chief because they pick who they want to be in that position. That's called the illusion of inclusion. See, there's no evidence of racism because this guy. That of which whom the only black people that look at him as not a sellout are those individuals that think just like him. Let's call them black conservatives. Now mind you, I'm not political, but I do recognize political trends. And black conservatives have a tendency to sound just like conservative white men. You know the whole pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. If you weren't committing so much crime, then you wouldn't be locked up at such a high rate. The all too familiar obfuscation of I'm not exactly sure how guns and drugs got into the black community and why we receive harsher prison sentences for those same guns and drugs. But that's not an evidence of racism. Let them tell it. That's an evidence of culture. And that's why you can't trust black conservatives, because in their mind, black people are an inherently violent and law-breaking people. But considering the reasons as to why those crimes is negative and actually verbalizing it, negative. But don't get to thinking that the ideologies of liberal and democratic black people are any better, because they're trash as well. Hey, black Democrats, 3-strike rule ring a bell? Yeah, well, you voted for him. And a laundry list of detrimental practices and laws to the black community was written under a democratic regime. The real woke is not being political at all. In my estimation, both of them are scared to have conflict. Being pro-red or being pro-blue doesn't do shit, but being pro-black pisses everybody off. And what would be the most beneficial thing that black people can do as a collective? We all know the answer to that, and the answer to that is distance themselves from the white population. We'll do you one better. You can keep the sellouts. They won't be upset staying over there, and neither will we. And then we could see whether or not black people as a culture and as a people are inherently violent and law-breaking people. We've never run that on the field test. Do they really commit crime because they're just that bad? Or does condition actually play a part? And there's another example of white privilege, the privilege of not relinquishing your slaves and finding out the answer to that question. As far as we're concerned, the people in the hood that don't give a damn about politics, you can keep Don Lemon and you can keep David Clark. So the answer to white people's question about white privilege, that is, name one right that you have that we don't, is simple, and it's done by posing another question. Name one detrimental practice or behavior that black people display that isn't a consequence of white law and white supremacy.